Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley, and every week we bring you the stories of people who are improving the world around them. They do it locally, globally, and digitally. Our club, the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley, is an online service club. It's asynchronous as well, which means that all those folks out there who have a heart for service but are crazy busy might find the flexibility of our program something that they really quite enjoy. If curious, go to rotary.cool. That'll get you to us. And in the spirit of bringing you really cool and inspiring stories, I was able to connect with a gentleman who is part of a movement related to thinking differently about agriculture. This is a guy with an amazing background, and I am excited for him to speak to us. If you want to read his full bio, pause this recording wherever you have found it and scroll down that page a bit or up that page a bit and see what is there because you can learn lots about Oren in that space. But Oren Falkowitz, what a pleasure it is to have you. I hand the mic over to you. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's my pleasure. As a shared Russian, used to live in Silicon Valley, and so it's great to be talking with your club and everyone else who's joining virtually to learn more. So I'll just maybe start with a little bit about myself. I'm Oren Falkowitz. I'm originally from South Florida, and I moved to Washington, D.C., where I am today, to start my career working within the Department of Defense. So I worked at the National Security Agency for a number of years, and then since that time have been the founder and CEO of a couple of companies, a company in Boston, a company in Silicon Valley where I lived for almost a decade, and then I've moved back to Washington, D.C. to start Area 2 Farms, and I'm happy to share a little bit more about that with you and answer your questions, about it. Today, if you think about where our food comes from, and especially with a lot of the new discussion around the dietary guidelines that the government is putting out, you'll find that food and its relationships to us, to people, is kind of broken, right? And there's a lot of gaps in between it. And so, what we've set out to do with our business is to bring the source of food directly into the place where we all live and work and advance our lives. So our business is really focused around designing, building, and then operating farms, but those farms are actually integrated into the communities that they serve. And that seems like a simple idea, but there's actually quite a lot of technology and innovation that's required in order to make that happen. And we think it really makes it a very unique, sort of once in a lifetime opportunity to think about infrastructure in cities and how that infrastructure can be evolved and how it can support people. One of the things that you might sort of think about before we get fully into it is, well, why can't you just farm in a city today? It seems like, this country was founded on agrarian principles. We're celebrating our quinticentennial this year. There have been farms. I live in an area, there's a farm. Where I grew up in South Florida, we used to go almost every weekend to Blood's Orange Grove, and that's where we got our orange juice. And everyone got their orange juice from Mr. Blood, and it was super great. But Blood's Orange Grove doesn't exist anymore. It was bulldozed and it was turned into apartment buildings. Even in Silicon Valley, it used to be that you could wake up and see apricot or walnut blossoms on your car in the morning. And all of those have been sort of bulldozed and turned into office buildings and office parks and so forth. And so there's this idea of progress, right, that has happened. And sometimes we think good things get left behind in that progress. But one of the things that has happened is that our relationship and our zoning and our laws have created some prohibitions around where things can be farmed. And historically, that might have been for good reason, to remove things like diseases and odors and pests, right, from the places that we live for health reasons. But there's an opportunity, I think, to change that and to make some positive moves forward. So our goal in our business is to be able to develop a farm, and that farm should operate kind of like a local butcher, where it provides a complete offering, but a differentiated set of staples than what you could get from a grocery store or shipped to you or something to that effect. And that basket, that complete offering, should be certified organic, which is the gold standard for food quality in our country today. And it should include things like lettuces, herbs, root vegetables, microgreens, all sorts of specialty items. And what we find is that the closer the food is produced to people, the fresher, the more unique the varieties are, the higher quality vitamins, nutrients, antioxidants, and so forth. This idea of proximity is actually really essential when it comes to food for a couple of reasons I'll just briefly touch on before getting into the technology. The first is that people are, I think, generally aware of something like spinach might be high in vitamin C, but they'd be shocked to learn that by the time spinach is harvested and then transported across the country, it loses almost 100% of its vitamin C nutrient capacity. This probably makes sense if you think about it because the plant's living, right? And post-harvest and being delivery, it's actually decaying. But it goes further than that because over the years, as stores have pushed growers and farmers to have increased shelf stability, we are seeing a reduction in varieties and we're seeing a breeding effect happen where people are not breeding for color or not breeding for flavor or nutrient value. They're breeding for can this thing survive the journey, right? And that means that you're today getting products that are super, significantly inferior to what they would have been, uh, just a few years ago or a decade ago. So if you want to build a farm right in a city, your first view is where am I going to get hundreds of acres to be able to do this? That's naturally not possible. And so what we wanted to be able to do is to shrink the size of the farm in a couple of ways. One, the physical footprint of the farm down to something that's closer to 5,000, square feet. And the second is the amount of food that the farm actually produces being enough for a neighborhood. If the farm produces too much food and that food can't be consumed, then it forces the business to become part of this multimodal transportation network that hurts farmers today and makes them wholesalers and not have relationships with their communities. And so, in order to shrink the farm down, we've built technology that allows us to go vertical with the growing, meaning that we can stack plants on top of one another. So if you think of a traditional field as being maybe a horizontal or a kind of grow or just kind of grow outwards, we're able to compress a lot of the space, compress hundreds of acres into smaller spaces by going up. And in order to do that, um, you need systems that can both store the plants, but what you find is that as you're stacking things on top of one another, you start to get different temperature or different thermal gradients existing. So every child knows that heat rises, right? And when heat rises, that means that plants at different levels might be experiencing a different phenomenon that impact the way that they grow. In the past, of folks who have used this style, this vertical style of growing, the way that they've tried to solve this is by um, installing expensive HVAC equipment and simply normalizing the climate, right, to great expense, both on the energy side and on the cost side. And our innovation is to make the plants move versus fighting the heat or fighting the physics of the thermodynamics. And so what I mean by that is that because plants, just like you and me, have a circadian rhythm where we want it to be warmer in the day, cooler when we go to sleep. If we're getting a natural temperature gradation, we can just rotate the plants through these levels using a smart proprietary robotic system that we've built that allows for high performance, high modularity, and also to support that large mix of crops that we were talking about. The second sort of key innovation is that a lot of people who have tried to grow in this style have done so by using technologies like hydroponics or aquaponics or aeroponics or things that remove soil from the mix. And we feel like we wanted to invest in soil because investing in soil is the foundation of an organic farm. That soil allows for a complete market basket. While it might be like technically possible to grow a carrot hydroponically, it's not practical to grow all crops just dangling in water. And that there creates the strongest connection between food outcomes and health outcomes to have soil. And so our investments in soil are around the construction, the composition of what the soil is made of, the microbiome, the diversity that the crops allow for, otherwise in soilless approaches, and then achieving the organic certification through that. And that means we invest in that type of analysis and in worm breeding and composting and things that allow the soil to create its own healthy ecosystem, for the business. And then the third and sort of last pillar, what we do on the technology side is in plant breeding or plant genetics. Because as I mentioned, so much pressure has been put on growers all over the world to solve for supply chain distribution problems and not to solve for human problems and human quality problems. What you'll find is that it's actually very difficult to kind of go backwards and find things that are unique or colorful. If anyone has ever done any gardening or looked at something like the Baker Creek from they have a store in Petaluma, California, and also in I think in Branson, Missouri. But if anyone's ever looked at like the Baker Creek heirloom seed catalog, you would be amazed that there are hundreds of varieties of carrots and hundreds of varieties of tomatoes. But at the store, you might see like two or three of these things. Or if you've traveled the world, you'd be surprised. Why am I only getting the Cavendish, the yellow banana in the store, but there are red bananas and blue bananas and plantains and large bananas and small bananas, etc. And our plant breeding allows us to bring the best of what's good for you back in to the farm. And sometimes that's health reasons, sometimes it's color reasons, sometimes it's flavor reasons, sometimes it's, all sorts of other reasons. But that ends up being a key thing. And so between those two things, the robotics, the soil investments, and the plants, we were able to develop these farms. And the great outcome, of the farm is that it's a community place. Farms used to be central to every community across human history, not only in our country, but in the beginning, literally, Genesis 1:1, right? There was a farm, and our farmers are not only familiar faces, they're hubs for connections, and they are experts in bringing people their most basic needs that they need through smart innovations and technology. So happy to, discuss and share more with you all, but I hope that's a very helpful overview of what we try to do.
Well, it absolutely is, and I am excited for us to jump into this. So, first of all, I want to introduce the people that we've got on the recording. We have a guest with us from Oregon, past District Governor Claire. From our club, we have on Catalina Island in Southern California, Ernie Rodriguez. Here in the Bay Area, we've got Shags in Walnut Creek. My name is Rushton. I'm in San Jose. Up in up in Vancouver, British Columbia, we have Nick Lagarde. And on the eastern coast of Italy, we have Cecilia Babkirk. Oren, man, there are so many cool things about what you're saying and the kind of education that this implies. So let's just kind of start with some of the mechanics of all of this. Ernie says like, okay, if you've got a 5,000 square foot farm, given your technologies for making it vertical and the movement that you incorporate through what you do, how many people can you end up feeding with these things, at least given the kinds of things you grow?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's the most essential question to, I think, making it work. So I think one of the ways that people in agribusiness begin often is to kind of work backwards. Like, I want to make so much money. How many acres do I need, and so forth. And what it turns out, though, Ernie, is that if you grow too much, which is really more of the thing that we're focused on, you'll wake up one day and say, I have 1 million tomatoes that are ready for harvest. What am I going to do with 1 million tomatoes? Right? And so this ends up being the most important question to solve for, to creating a profitable farm for a farmer to operate. Because if you have 1 million tomatoes and you don't have people to sell them to, now the Heinz people want them, the salsa people want them, but they don't pay, what the tomato's worth. They'll pay fractions of pennies, for it. So today our farms will support between 400 and 500 families in a given week. It's intentionally capped because we believe that a farm being within a certain proximity of its community can easily support them. And then what we would do is we want to grow the number of farms. So instead of moving the food, right, we'll just move the farm to be closer to people. So we'll have many smaller farms rather than one or several large industrial farms. Does that help answer your question?
Looks like we're getting a head nod on that one for sure. Now, you're also, dealing with energy needs wherever you set up one of these farms. I mean, you're saving energy in terms of reducing the transportation involved, but in terms of doing what you do with a local area to farm, What kinds of things have you done to make that work for you? Or have you tapped solar power in a particular way? I mean, how are you working with energy to make your system work?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. So we think about the sort of energy and environmental aspects of what we do holistically. As you sort of rightly pointed out, there are massive savings. The average item at the grocery store for most Americans has traveled 1,500 miles. Our average customer is about 3.1 miles, from us. So that's a 99.99, whatever percent reduction in energy on that standpoint. The sun is free, right? It doesn't cost any energy to use the sun, and we use supplemental lighting to support our crop growth. But the size of our farms, that's in the tens of dollars a day versus, significant industrial uses. So I think it's a balance, and we try to carefully, follow that. We can use less water sometimes. Specifically, though, one of the things that we've done is compared to other farms is that, as I was mentioning in the vertical systems, you would have lights on every level. And
Mhm.
because of those thermal stratifications, what they would do at night is turn off all the lights and then run HVAC, which can be an expensive energy use. Because we're not doing that, we see savings in two ways. One, we don't have the HVAC requirement, for our farms. We don't have to like suck the room down to meet a certain set point. And the second is that our bottom levels, about 25% of our farm, can be unlit. So we can have a significant reduction in this artificial light because those are the sleeping periods, if you will, or the dark periods, if you will, and you let the motion go there. So I think over time we continue to sort of study and track, these requirements. These outputs and our usage rates and find smart ways to make them work.
I'm imagining like a 24-hour movement cycle that allows the different plants that you're growing to experience kind of a night and day just based on where they are in the building.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah. It's
All
just
right.
a kind of single rotation through the system.
So how many farms are there in Area 2 farms?
So we'll be opening up our third in Fairfax, Virginia, hopefully, in the next a couple weeks or month, yeah, here. And then our hope is to build another 10 farms across the country over the course of this year. And we're looking to build farms in places like Nashville, Tennessee, the Atlanta area, Charlotte, Phoenix, Arizona, Tempe, Arizona, South Florida, Raleigh, Durham, Orlando, Tampa, uh, Cincinnati, Columbus, all sorts of places.
Cool. I see Nick has a question. And Nick, go
Yeah.
ahead and ask.
Yeah, I guess it's directly related to that, which is what kind of location is ideal and how are you like selecting these locations? And then the kind of corollary is it about the location from a building perspective, or I'm picturing this like a CSA where I want to like if I was in your area, I'd be wanting to sign up to get this fresh food. That sounds awesome. So what are the criteria and how do you get to the point of being a consumer of Area 2 farms?
Well, we do operate it as a CSA. For folks who aren't familiar, it stands for Community Supported Agriculture. It's kind of like the original form of a subscription model where community members buy a share of the farm. So everything that we produce is divided and then shared amongst those people. That's why we have the maximum number of customers and then the sizing, and that allows us to create sort of right-sized shares for folks. I think the thing that's most important to us is the first thing that we do when we're selecting sites is we try to engage the local community. And so we're in conversations with local leaders in all the places that I mentioned to talk to them about the need and also the zoning issues. As I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of places have historical agricultural roots, but they've suffered sort of an amnesia. They've forgotten that they had any farms there, even where our farms operate today in Northern Virginia. When we first engaged city leaders, they're like, there are no farms here. And, we were quick to point out that like a mile away is Mount Vernon, which is a massive farm that George Washington, and our founding fathers offered, and Monticello, and all these places. They actually all used to be, the entire thing used to be farms, right? But over time, because of that progress that I mentioned at the beginning, it kind of has seeped away from it. And so we kind of start there and have that conversation about the applicable land use and the community need. I think it's not a particularly surprising um, desire for folks to want to have this. That part's a pretty straightforward piece. And then it's about finding the right opportunities. And what we find is that all across this country, whether it's vacant office buildings or what are known as infills or parcels, that have been underdeveloped for a variety of reasons, we can make those into something that's really valuable for the community. And that's kind of the work that we're engaged with as we build the technology and build the farms and the farmers and so forth. But that's usually kind of a first step. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. It actually leads to kind of the next question that I have, which is around the idea of like I read about you a while ago, and I like I can see your history. Like if you look at like YouTube, because I definitely wanted to look up how do you do this. Um, you talked about a lot, like you have three farms now, opening up or they're opening up another one soon, but then you also talked about 10 this year. Is this where like are you in a point where you're to use the technology term, are you scaling? Like, is this where you like the first couple of years were how to figure this thing out, and now you've kind of cracked the code? Is that where you are in your journey?
Well, certainly the first, couple of years, we're doing a lot of things to try to figure it out. There's the technology piece. There's also the human piece, right? Which is, um, do people want to eat the things that we're growing, right? And how do we adjust that? Actually, I think the hardest thing that to figure out is what's the right composition of a basket for people. People are very different eaters, right? There is kind of not a one size fits all, both in terms of volume and variety and so forth. But of course, the challenge of a farm is it's not a grocery store, right? And you want to provide people what we kind of landed on working with our communities is like a differentiated staple, a thing that you could base your week around, but it would be complementary to all the other things that you're doing, whether it's business travel or whether it's like, I have a sandwich every day, or I like to do this, or the seasons are changing, right? And so that was a key thing to kind of work through, and we've learned a lot through that. And so I'd say that like in this next phase, I wouldn't quite call it scaling because our ambition would be to have a farm, an Area 2 farms location within about 10 miles of 90% of the US population. So we have big goals for the number of farms that we want to have. And I'd say that this is just the next logical step in what we're trying to do by going from the ones that are very tightly coupled in our area and being able to spread them out into new communities and continuing to make those work. And I think from there, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to hit the type of growth, no pun intended, that we envision for these farms.
So one of the key pieces here is your emphasis on community. And I'm interested in how you approach that as a business, right? So if your goal is to make sure that a community embraces the idea of having locally grown things, and you mentioned like this being a community place or a farm as a community place, are you engaging communities with the farms in some ways, or are you just working to make sure they understand what is offered?
Well, no, the farm itself is a new piece of community infrastructure, which we think is really essential to the business and just to like what's going on. And what I mean by that is a couple of things. You know, One, there are vacant and empty spaces, right? For instance, the newest farm that we're building, it was a farm 100 years ago this year when we'll reopen up the new farm. And in the intermediate 100 years, it became like a Howard Johnson's, which for those of you who don't know, like that was like a big deal at some point, right? I went to Howard, like that was like a big deal. Um, it became like a gas station. It became all these things, and they were all things of progress, right? Like Howard Johnson was like a big deal. That was like we're advancing. We got one of those here. Yeah, they had the fried clam strips and the sundae. Yeah, I remember the little waffle. Anyways, and it turns out though that sometimes things got lost, along that path. And so by being able to reestablish, the farm, especially because people have never been more interested in their health, never been more interested in issues of longevity, never been more desperate to connect with one another because we do so many things online, which is a great enabler, right, of so many things, but there's still room for people to connect. And so the farm itself as a physical place shows people where their food comes from. If you look at labels as an example, like just calling something organic or fair trade or non-GMO, it's on some level just a veneer for not knowing where it came from, right? It's some sort of sticker to kind of say, we can't tell you or show you or explain it all to you, so we're going to just, do this thing and you'll have to attach it. And those standards are essential, I think, for a lot of reasons. But having a place where you can actually see it is far superior. I mean, so, one of the gentlemen on this call, I guess, has been to Blood's Orange Grove where I went to. Like, now I don't know if they're the best oranges, but everyone who went there just feels like it was because they had an experience. They were part of it. Everyone has a local sandwich shop. Everyone has a local ice cream shop. Everyone has something they did with their mom where they picked apples or strawberries, right? So just the experiential part of being humans as it relates is really essential. And then the third piece, I think of the community part is we want people to engage. So, we in the last year have had thousands of K through 12 students from local schools come by, learn, and you'd be surprised that students, when they'll look at something like a tomato and they see a flower, don't realize the tomato grows through the flower, or where a pepper comes from, or or just like the process, and they find it fascinating and exciting. And kids that grow kale or see fruits and vegetables growing, they eat those things, right? And they become familiar with them, and they don't need the synthetic versions of it. And it creates just, I think, better outcomes, for everyone. So that's what we mean by community is connecting these two things together.
That makes sense. So, if you're going to reach the goal that you described of being within a few miles of 90% of the population of the country, what is the model that gets you there? I mean, franchises? How does this work?
Well, I think, the thing that's most important is that um, the farmer become the center of the conversation. And so at our locations, we really want, just like you would if you went to a butcher or like maybe a local hardware store, for people to have some sort of relationship with the people that are operating it. And so that is really the key thing to it. But I would take a step back and I would say that if you go further back into the largest agricultural businesses that exist today, I'm thinking of like Land O'Lakes or some of the dairy industry or like Ocean Spray, um, or Driscoll's Strawberries, which is the largest berry producer. They are all a form of cooperative, right? They are not one farm. They are not one person, right? There is not enough land in any one place for this to happen. And so what we find is that the best and the most successful agricultural businesses have always had some sort of a form of cooperation, and that is really the model, that we intend to bring forward. And I think this is true not only for establishing the farmer as the focal point, but also because behind every farmer is usually another farmer. Like there's questions to ask every day. There's, hey, this happened. What do I do about this? And so creating a network of farmers working together, creating a network of farms that are supporting their communities that are led by farmers leads to better outcomes and more intimate relationships between people and their food.
So, a last question before we wind down the recording. You have this background in security, the NSA. There had to be things you learned along the way that are serving you well now. What are some of those things?
Well, Benjamin Franklin said that there are three ways to acquire wealth. The first is through war. So maybe my time in the Department of Defense, and he called that stealing. The second is through commerce. So I've run two startups, he called that cheating. And then the third is through agriculture, which he described as the only honest way. So I believe in some way, like I'm just completing the full circle of of what Franklin described, especially appropriate in this semi-quinticentennial year. But look, my desire to work for the government, which was a really fantastic opportunity, was to do some form of service, right? And to use technology to solve problems for humans. Those problems were in defense of our country. The work that I've done for, starting other businesses were in a service of using technology to stop people from being the victim of cyber attacks or being able to analyze their data and come to better answers. And the technology we build is in the same purpose, right? And I found that when people work hard together and you build great teams, you get really amazing outcomes. And if you can use technology to be an enabler for that, that's really exciting, especially when the problems and the solutions and the outcomes are tangible and you can see them and feel them every day. So those are things that motivate me. And then, I think, just sort of fit together.
Well, I think that's a great place to wind things down. What a wonderful set of thoughts to share in that story. And
Thank you.
all of you who have taken time to watch this or listen to the podcast, we thank you for taking the time to do so. We know that the opportunity to hear a really fascinating story about how to make communities better is something worth sharing, and we hope you will do that. You can always point people to our site, rotary.cool. Go to our meetings archive or our podcast page, to learn about the Inspiring Solutions or Inspiring People or Inspiring Women series that we put out there. And we think that we're making the community a little bit better by having those kinds of stories available to people. As we always like to do, we hand it back to our speaker for the final word. So, Oren, what would you like people to have clearly in mind as they finish this recording?
Oh, well, I'd just like to say thank you, I guess. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or if you're interested in starting a farm or if you're growing something and want seeds. But we're just always excited to engage and connect with people who are interested in plants and food and the future. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank all of you for watching, and we will see you next week.